When 32-year-old real estate investor Malik Turner walked into the leasing office of Manhattan's luxurious Skyline Tower to rent the penthouse suite, agent Rebecca Hamilton told him, "These apartments are $45,000 a month. I think we have more suitable options for you." Malik calmly replied, "Price isn't an issue. I just want to see the penthouse." Rebecca responded, "Unfortunately, based on our profile assessment, you're not an eligible candidate." What Malik pulled out next changed everything. The documents proving he was one of Skyline Tower's main investors, owning 22% of the property. Within hours, the truth would end Rebecca's career and force the entire real estate firm to rewrite its rental policies forever. Before the story starts, drop a comment. Which city are you watching from? And if you stand for justice and equality, share this story and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can make our voices stronger. The October afternoon sun reflected off the glass facade of Skyline Tower, Manhattan's newest ultra-luxury residential building that dominated the Midtown skyline with its 72 stories of architectural ambition. Malik Turner stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building he'd helped finance, feeling a mixture of pride and anticipation. Today, he was finally going to see the penthouse he'd been eyeing since construction began 3 years ago. At 32, Malik had built Turner Capital from a single property investment into a $340 million real estate portfolio that included stakes in 14 Manhattan luxury buildings. He'd started young, buying his first property at 24 with money saved from his software engineering job, flipping it for profit, and reinvesting aggressively. By 28, he'd quit tech entirely to focus on real estate full-time, and now he controlled one of the most successful minority-owned investment firms in New York. Skyline Tower was his crown jewel, a 22% stake that made him the building's largest individual investor. He'd poured $75 million into the project, sat through countless development meetings, and approved every luxury amenity from the rooftop infinity pool to the private wine cellars. But he'd never actually lived in any of his investment properties, always maintaining separation between business and personal life. Until now. The penthouse on the 68th floor had been calling to him since he'd first seen the architectural renderings. Floor-to-ceiling windows with Central Park views, 4,500 square feet of living space, a private terrace, smart home technology integrated into every surface. It was perfect, and as a major investor, he'd get a preferential rental rate of $45,000 per month, steep for most people, but a fraction of what he was earning from his portfolio. He'd deliberately dressed casually today, Nike sneakers, jeans, a simple black hoodie, and a backpack containing his laptop. He wanted to see how the leasing office operated when they didn't know who he was, to assess whether the property management team he'd approved was treating all prospective tenants with the professionalism and respect the building's reputation demanded. The lobby was exactly as luxurious as planned. Italian marble floors, a massive art installation suspended from the ceiling, and a concierge desk staffed by impeccably dressed professionals. Malik nodded to them as he passed, heading toward the sales and leasing office tucked discreetly behind frosted glass doors. Inside, the office was designed to impress. Leather furniture, huge monitors displaying property tours, and walls covered with photos of the building's amenities. A blonde woman in her early 40s sat behind a glass desk, perfectly manicured nails clicking on a keyboard. Her name plate read, Rebecca Hamilton, Senior Leasing Consultant. Rebecca looked up as Malik entered, and he saw the familiar flicker in her expression, the quick assessment based on his appearance, the subtle calculation happening behind her professional smile. "Good afternoon," Malik said pleasantly. "I'm interested in viewing the penthouse units. Specifically, the one on the 68th floor." Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The penthouse collection. Yes, those are our most exclusive residences." She paused, her eyes moving from Malik's sneakers to his hoodie. "The monthly rent for those units starts at $45,000. May I ask if you're familiar with our rental requirements?" "I'm aware of the pricing," Malik replied calmly. "I'd like to schedule a viewing today if possible." Rebecca's fingers drummed on her desk, but she didn't reach for her scheduling tablet. Mr. Turner. Malik Turner. Mr. Turner. Rebecca's tone took on a quality that Malik recognized immediately, the false concern that preceded rejection. The penthouse units are quite extraordinary, but they require a very specific tenant profile. In addition to the monthly rent, we require proof of annual income of at least 40 times the monthly payment, which would be $1.8 million annually. We also conduct comprehensive background checks, credit verifications, and reference assessments. I understand, Malik said. I can provide all of that documentation. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying Malik with barely concealed skepticism. Mr. Turner, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but perhaps I could show you some of our other available units first? We have beautiful two-bedroom apartments starting at $8,500 per month that might be more suitable for your needs. The word suitable carried weight that had nothing to do with square footage or amenities. Malik felt the familiar burn of prejudice dressed up as professional courtesy. I'm specifically interested in the penthouse, Malik said, his voice remaining even. I've done my research on this building. I know exactly what I want. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. Sir, I'm trying to save you time. The application process for our premium units is quite rigorous. We have income requirements, employment verification, personal references from current residents of comparable properties. Frankly, the penthouse collection attracts a very particular clientele: CEOs, celebrities, established business owners. The vetting process is intense. I'm aware, Malik replied. I'm prepared for a thorough vetting process. Rebecca sighed with exaggerated patience. Mr. Turner, let me be direct. The building's ownership and management have very high standards for the penthouse level. These aren't just apartments. They're statements about the caliber of residents we attract. We need tenants who reflect the building's prestige, who have established reputations in their fields, who can demonstrate not just financial capacity, but also appropriate lifestyle and background. The implications were no longer subtle. Rebecca was actively trying to discourage Malik from applying, using coded language about appropriate lifestyle and background to communicate what she wouldn't say explicitly, that she didn't think a young black man in casual clothes belonged in a $45,000 per month apartment. I see, Malik said quietly. He reached into his backpack, and Rebecca's hand moved instinctively toward the security button under her desk, a reaction that spoke volumes about her assumptions. But Malik simply pulled out a leather portfolio, placing it on Rebecca's glass desk. Perhaps this will address your concerns about my profile. He opened the folder to reveal the first document, a letter from Chase Private Bank confirming liquid assets exceeding $85 million in Malik's personal accounts, not including his real estate holdings. Rebecca's eyes widened as she scanned the document, her professional composure cracking for the first time. As you can see, Malik said calmly, the income requirement of $1.8 million annually won't be an issue. My investment portfolio generates substantially more than that monthly. He flipped to the next document, his tax returns for the past 3 years, showing annual income climbing from $12 million to $28 million. Rebecca's face had gone pale, but Malik continued, pulling out reference letters from 3 of Manhattan's most prominent real estate developers, all praising Malik Turner of Turner Capital as a visionary investor and valued partner. Regarding references from residents of comparable properties, Malik said, his tone still professional but carrying an edge now, I don't currently rent at buildings like this. I own stakes in them. He placed another document on the desk, a portfolio summary from Turner Capital showing ownership stakes in 14 Manhattan luxury residential properties, with valuations and investment dates clearly listed. Rebecca was no longer looking at Malik with skepticism. She was looking at him with dawning horror, her eyes scanning the documents spread across her desk. Mr. Turner, I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you didn't ask, Malik interrupted gently. You took one look at me and decided I didn't belong in your penthouse units. You made assumptions about my income, my background, my lifestyle based purely on my appearance. He reached into his portfolio one final time, pulling out a document that made Rebecca's remaining color drain completely from her face. It was a shareholder agreement for Skyline Tower LLC, showing the ownership structure of the building they were currently sitting in. At the top of the investor list, Malik Turner, 22% equity stake, $75 million investment. I don't just want to rent the penthouse, Ms. Hamilton, Malik said quietly. I own 22% of this entire building. I'm the largest individual investor in Skyline Tower. I approved the budget for this leasing office. I signed off on your employment contract, though I admit I never actually met you until today. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Her hand trembled as she picked up the shareholder agreement, reading and rereading the ownership structure as if it might change. The irony, Malik continued, is that I came here today specifically to assess how my property management team was handling prospective tenants. I wanted to see if the values I insisted on during development, equality, professionalism, respect for all qualified applicants, were being upheld at the leasing level. He gestured at the documents covering her desk. Instead, I found discrimination dressed up as profile assessment. I found assumptions about who belongs in luxury housing based on skin color rather than financial qualification. I found exactly the kind of prejudice that I've spent my career working to overcome. The office door opened and a man in an expensive suit hurried in. Thomas Chun, the building's property manager, clearly alerted by someone that something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Mr. Turner," Thomas exclaimed, his face flushed with panic. "I had no idea you were visiting today. If you'd known, Miss Hamilton would have treated me differently," Malik finished. "That's exactly the problem. Every prospective tenant deserves the respect and professionalism you would show to someone you knew was an investor. That's not special treatment. That's basic human dignity." Thomas looked at Rebecca, whose career was visibly crumbling before her eyes. "What happened?" "Miss Hamilton told me I wasn't the right profile for the penthouse units," Malik explained. "She tried to redirect me to cheaper apartments. She questioned my income, my background, my lifestyle. She did everything except ask for actual documentation before deciding I didn't belong here." Thomas's expression cycled through shock, anger, and resigned understanding. "Mr. Turner, I am so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Rebecca, you're suspended effective immediately. Please collect your belongings." "Wait," Malik said, stopping Thomas. "Before you fire her, I want to understand something." He turned to Rebecca. "Why? What made you assume I couldn't afford this apartment?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. I thought. You're young, and you were dressed casually, and I just assumed." "Say it," Malik pressed. "What did you actually assume?" Rebecca's tears were flowing now, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. "I assumed you couldn't afford it because you're black. Because I've never seen a young black man rent one of our penthouses. Because I was taught to look for certain indicators of wealth, and you didn't fit them." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Thomas looked sick. The assistant who'd been hovering near the door backed away slowly. "Thank you for being honest," Malik said quietly. "That's the first step toward change, acknowledging the bias instead of hiding it behind policy and procedure." He gathered his documents, replacing them carefully in his leather portfolio. "Thomas, I want a complete overhaul of your leasing protocols. No more profile assessments before seeing financial documentation. No more assumptions about who can afford what based on appearance. And mandatory bias training for every employee who interfaces with prospective tenants." "Absolutely, Mr. Turner. Whatever you want. And Rebecca will be the first person to complete the new training program," Malik finished. "I don't want her fired. I want her to learn, to understand how her biases affected a potential tenant, and then I want her to help teach other leasing professionals to recognize their own assumptions." Rebecca looked up with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "Mr. Turner, I don't deserve." "You don't," Malik agreed. "But meaningful change requires more than punishment. It requires people willing to confront their prejudices honestly and do better. He turned back to Thomas. Schedule that penthouse viewing for next week. I'll bring my attorney to review the lease terms. And Thomas? I'll be conducting more unannounced visits to all my properties. If this is happening here, I need to know if it's happening elsewhere. As Malik walked out of the office, through the luxurious lobby, and back onto the Manhattan street, he pulled out his phone and began drafting an email to the board of directors for all 14 buildings in his portfolio. The subject line read, Mandatory Fair Housing Compliance Initiative, Board Approval Required. The incident at Skyline Tower would become a case study in his industry, not because of the dramatic revelation, but because of what came after, comprehensive reforms that changed how luxury real estate assessed prospective tenants across the city. And when Malik finally moved into the 68th floor penthouse 3 weeks later, he made sure the first event he hosted was a fair housing seminar for every property manager, leasing agent, and sales consultant in his portfolio. Rebecca Hamilton was there, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the cost of assumptions. Sometimes justice wasn't about revenge or viral videos. Sometimes it was about using power and privilege to force systems to change, to make the path easier for the next person who didn't look like what prejudice expected wealth to look like. Malik stood in his new penthouse, looking out at Central Park and the city he'd conquered through intelligence, hard work, and an unwavering refusal to accept that other people's biases defined his limits. The view was spectacular, but the real victory was knowing that other young black investors, other people of color with means and ambition, would now be judged by their financial qualifications rather than the color of their skin. That was worth more than any penthouse.